I've ran 5,000 miles over the last 7 years, but I would have ran a lot more miles if I wasn't injured. And the reason that I was injured is that I didn't follow the correct principles to stay healthy while running, which is exactly what I've been doing over the last 12 months to take myself from barely being able to walk from a running injury to being able to run 40 miles a week. Now, I know dozens of chronically injured runners who don't focus on these principles, and if they did, they would be able to run injury-free. Now, when I first got injured running, I thought that it was because I had bad genetics, or I thought that it was because I was unlucky. But what I've learned is that it isn't about bad genetics, it isn't about luck or unluck, it's about following these principles. So I'm gonna give you 4 tips in just a second, but first you need to understand a critical concept about the body, and that is anti-fragility. Now, what is anti-fragility? This effectively means that your body gains from responding to stress. Your body adapts to stress. For example, if you laid in bed for 30 days and did nothing in those 30 days, your muscles would atrophy and you'd barely be able to walk. This is actually why astronauts, when they return to Earth, they can barely walk, because gravity is a force always acting on us. It's a stress on our bodies and that our bodies are working against that actually make us stronger. But obviously, you can take this too far. For example, if you put a 600-pound weight on your back, you're gonna snap yourself in half. So anti-fragility is gonna be a key concept that applies throughout the 4 tips that we're about to get into. But let's get into that. So tip number 1 to stay injury-free while running is to ramp your volume like a monk, not like a drunk. And without this tip, none of the other ones are going to work. It's the foundation under which everything else is built. I want you to think of your typical monk. They are patient, calm, collected, and they know how to delay gratification. And then I want you to think of your typical drunk. They're belligerent, they're at the bar, they're talking a million miles a minute, they're all over the place. We want to be more like the monk when we ramp our run volume versus like the drunk who is all over the place. The most popular formula for ramping volume in running is add 10% per week. This is a lot more like the drunk than it is like the monk. Because remember, we just talked about anti-fragility. Ramping your volume 10% per week is a mistake that many athletes make. And what it is it's much more like putting a 600-pound weight on your back versus something that's more manageable for you. Even though it doesn't sound like a lot, 10% per week is too much stress for your body to adapt to. So instead, the rule that we should look for is ramping our volume at most 10% per month. So for example, I run 40 miles per week. If I want to eventually get up to 60 miles per week, I'm looking at that taking about 20 weeks because I'm only going to ramp 1 mile per week. This sounds like nothing, which is the point, so that your body can adapt to the stress that you're placing it under. And even though it doesn't sound like a lot, 1 mile per week, after 10 weeks, I'm already up to 50 miles. And what's even better is that I won't end up injured, so I'll be able to consistently run those 50 miles. It's a lot better to be able to run 50 miles week in, week out, instead of only being able to run 50 miles for a couple of weeks and then having to sit on the sidelines for several weeks while we are injured. The way I want you to remember this is that the most successful runners are consistent every single day, not sporadically. Adding 1 mile per week, as an example, consistent every single day, versus adding 10 miles one week to get to 50 miles a week and then having to sit on the sidelines, sporadic. Not what we want. Tip number 2 is don't blend it. Now, hear me out on this one. I want you to imagine for a moment a blender with a couple of bananas in it. Now, if you turn that blender on, it's going to spin really intensely. And all that's going to be left of those bananas is going to be a cake batter, basically. This is what we do to our bodies when we are running too fast or too intense. The bananas, we put ourselves in the blender and we blend ourselves up, and then we leave our muscles looking like cake batter. Obviously, that's not what really happens inside your body, but I think you get what I mean. That we are breaking down the muscles in our body by running a little bit too fast all the time. And really, what this tip means is to don't blend it, is to don't go so intense all of the time in terms of doing sprints. And then on top of that, learn what a good slow pace is. You need to run extremely slow in your slow pace. A lot of runners, myself included for a long time, don't know what this means, to run slow. What it typically looks like is that most of your running, 70, 80, 90% of your running, depending on the point in the season, should be in what we call at the aerobic threshold, which would be 70% of your max heart rate as a place to start. You can do more detailed testing. I made another video about that. Running this slow is extremely hard at first, but it gets easier over time, I promise. The best runners who remain injury-free are disciplined, and you need to bring that discipline, not just to the fact that you're going out every day and running, but also you need to bring that discipline in your training itself, in your training intensity that you let yourself reach. Tip number 3 is to diversify. This tip allows you to gain fitness without risking any running injuries. Here's how. Now, if I was your financial advisor and I told you, hey, you should invest every single one of your dollars, all of your money, into one stock, into one company, you would look at me at first and say, hey, that seems pretty risky. And then you'd probably fire me as your financial advisor, as you should. But I see runners make this mistake all the time when it comes to their running. They take all of the time that they have to exercise and they put it into running. So of course, what ends up happening is that they start running too much and then they want results faster. So they start running too intense or slightly too intense for every single run because they're not getting the results that they want, and then they end up injured. So this is why it's extremely important to diversify our athletic endeavors and to cross-train. Cross-training is pretty easy. I love it because it changes the monotony of training. For example, I love to cycle. I love going for bike rides with all of my friends. It's a great way to catch up with my friends, spend a lot of time with my friends, to chat with them too, and just learn about what's going on in their lives. It also just sort of takes me out of running a little bit so that I don't focus on it so much. Additionally, I will sometimes row, and there are plenty of other modalities that you can use. Hiking is a great way of cross-training. Even walking is actually really good for you, and it gains fitness for you. There are many paths to aerobic fitness. They don't all need to come from running. Tip number 4 is stay hard. For those of you that don't know, that was a super cringe David Goggins reference. But anyway, this tip is very similar to number 3. In fact, it's an extension of number 3. And really what it does is it takes all of the aerobic gains that you're making and it adds rocket boosters to them to propel you into the event or the result that you want. And what I'm talking about here is strength training. It is the foundation of our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments. It is how we get and stay strong. Now, the way this looks for me is that I do my strength training right after the 2 to 4 week block that I take to just do nothing for the season, my off season, if you will. And I do first some very heavy lifting to get really strong. And then after that, I do some focused hypertrophy to gain a little bit of muscle, because throughout the season I lose a little bit of muscle. And then finally, I do more maintenance work as I am ramping my volume for all of my aerobic exercise all the way up to whatever hours I want to be at. And eventually, for example, right now at this point in the season, mid base, I have phased out my strength training because I don't have the time for that plus all of my aerobic work. It's important to remember that strength is the foundation of our bodies. So it's really important to pay attention to it. Following these 4 tips is difficult. It can be hard. I've had fits and starts of following these and then not following these. But as soon as you get consistent with these tips is when you'll see that injuries just stop happening. That's how it's been for me, and I couldn't be happier, and I hope that it works for you too. Now, if you're interested in figuring out how slow is slow enough to run, I actually made a video that you can click here for zone 2, so check that out.